If you still believe the path to wealth is simple obedience, then you are not following a wealth plan. You are following a worker rule book. That is the first thing I want you to understand. Most people are not trapped because they are lazy. Most people are not trapped because they are too stupid to understand money. Most people are trapped because they were handed the wrong rule book so early in life that by the time they start questioning it, they have already built their identity around following it. Well, get good grades, be responsible, do not challenge authority, find a stable job, avoid risk, work hard, save what you can, wait your turn, retire quietly. That is a complete rule book. It produces decent employees. It produces socially acceptable adults. It can even produce a respectable life from the outside, but it almost never produces real wealth because real wealth is not built mainly by following worker rules more faithfully than the next person. Real wealth is built by switching rule books. That is the whole game. The source you gave me says this in its own blunt way. It argues that society teaches one set of rules for workers and a different set of rules for the rich. It says poor people are trained toward obedience, stability, and risk avoidance, while rich people are taught to ask questions, negotiate, manage risk, use debt to buy assets, and treat rules as flexible rather than sacred. It also makes an important distinction at the end. This is not about breaking every law blindly. It is about seeing which rules protect you, which rules merely domesticate you, and which social norms keep you average. Because almost nobody has the courage to question them. That is the valuable skeleton of the piece. And that is the skeleton I am keeping Fay file site. Fay turn 86 file 0 Fay, but I do not want to leave it at that. Because most people hear something like break the rules and immediately get confused. Some hear recklessness, some hear crime, some hear arrogance, some hear teenage rebellion wearing a finance costume. That is not what I mean. I mean something much more serious. I mean you need to understand that there are rules designed to protect you and there are rules designed to position you, and those are not the same thing. The rules that protect you keep you out of jail, out of stupid debt, out of legal disaster, out of moral rot, and out of the kinds of behavior that destroy lives. Keep those, the rules that position you, decide whether you spend your life as labor, as a saver, or as an owner. Question those relentlessly. That is the distinction most people were never taught. So let me give you the frame that matters. I call it the rule book switch. A rule book is not just a list of instructions. It is a worldview. It tells you what to fear, it tells you what to admire, it tells you what counts as responsible, it tells you what counts as dangerous. It tells you what kind of future is normal. And if the wrong rule book is running your life, then even your discipline gets spent in the wrong direction. You can become very good at following a bad map. And that is what happens to millions of decent, hard-working people. They become excellent at the wrong game. The first section of the worker rule book is what I call the obedience loop. The source opens here for a reason. Get good grades. Follow instructions. Do what your boss tells you. Do not question authority. Stay on the safe path. All of that sounds harmless because it is wrapped in social praise. Parents praise it, schools reward it, employers rely on it, institutions run on it. The problem is not that these behaviors are useless. The problem is that they are preparation for one role only. Worker, not owner, not allocator, not negotiator. Worker. The source says these are worker rules, not wealth building rules. And directionally that is right. Good grades often prove you can comply, remember, and perform under an externally designed standard. Those can be useful traits, but they do not automatically train you to identify asymmetry, build assets, negotiate from strength, or create your own opportunities. Fay file site, Fay turn 86 file 0 Fay. That is why I call it the obedience loop. You follow the rules, you get praised for following the rules, so you follow them more, you become emotionally dependent on approval from the system that is using your obedience. That is the loop, and once you are inside it, you start mistaking external praise for internal progress. That is where the trouble begins, because wealth does not care how well you followed instructions. Wealth cares what you own. Wealth cares what produces cash flow when you are not in the room. Wealth cares whether your decisions create leverage or merely salary. Wealth cares whether you built an asset or just built a better reputation for showing up on time. That is a much colder scorecard, and it is one the obedience loop never teaches you to read. The second section of the worker rule book is what I call the stability spell. This is where the story gets dangerous because the promise attached to it used to be more real than it is now. Get a stable job, stay with one company, keep your head down, do not rock the boat, you will be taken care of. That spell had more truth in a different era, long employment relationships, better pensions, stronger internal ladders, more corporate loyalty, more alignment between time served and lifetime security. The source says that world does not really exist anymore. And in the main, it is right. Pensions faded, layoffs became normalized, companies optimized for shareholders, not workers, emotional need for continuity. Stability became a story with thinner backing, but the spell survived, culturally long after the economics changed. Fe Felicite Fe turn 86 file 0 Fe, that is the stability spell. It convinces you that the safest visible path is also the strongest strategic path. Often it is not. A stable job can be useful, a stable job can be honorable, a stable job can finance your escape. But a stable job is not the same thing as economic security. A stable job is still one source of income controlled by somebody else. That is not security. That is concentrated dependence. And concentrated dependence is dangerous no matter how pretty the office looks. The source makes a point that matters here. Poor people are told to avoid risk and cling to job safety, while rich people learn to manage risk, not pretend they can eliminate it. That distinction is enormous, because a stable job feels safe only if you define safety in the shallow way. A paycheck arrives next week, fine. But can it be cut? Yes. Can the firm disappear? Yes. Can the role be automated, outsourced, downsized, or politically sacrificed? Yes, then the job was never absolute safety. It was temporary continuity. And temporary continuity is helpful, but it is not freedom. Fe Felicite, Fe turn 86 file 0 Fe. This is why I tell people not to romanticize stability. Use it, do not worship it. Use it as cash flow, use it as fuel, use it as cover while you build. But do not make the mistake of calling a paycheck wealth. A paycheck is the oxygen for the next month. Wealth is what stays alive when the paycheck stops. The third section of the worker rule book is what I call the safe debt lie. This part is subtle because it hides behind two truths at once. The first truth is real. Consumer debt can absolutely destroy people. Credit cards for nonsense, card debt for ego, payday loans, retail financing, lifestyle debt. That advice is sound. Avoid stupid debt. But then the worker rulebook sneaks in a second conclusion that is far less sound. All debt is dangerous and all safety lives in simply spending less than you earn forever. The source attacks that idea directly. It says rich people use debt all the time, but they use it differently. They borrow against assets, cash flow, and opportunity rather than consumption. Again, that needs cleaner language than the source gives it, but the underlying distinction is real. Consumer debt buys things that get weak or disappear or do not pay you back. Productive debt can buy something that appreciates, generates cash, or both. That difference is the line between debt as poison and debt as a tool. Fe Felicite, Fe turn 86 file 0 Fe. That is why I call it the safe debt lie, because the lie is not that debt is harmless. The lie is that all debt is morally the same. It is not. A person financing a luxury car to signal status is not doing the same thing as a person using carefully structured financing to acquire a cash-flowing asset. A person carrying revolving credit card balances to preserve a lifestyle is not doing the same thing as a person borrowing soberly against an asset with margin of safety and durable demand. The worker rulebook hates this distinction because it prefers simple moral categories. Debt bad, saving good, job safe, risk dangerous. That kind of simplicity is excellent for training compliance. It is terrible for building wealth. The adult rulebook is more precise. Consumption debt is dangerous. Productive debt can be useful. Bad leverage kills. Sensible leverage can accelerate. The question is never debt or no debt in the abstract. The real question is, what does this debt buy? What does it depend on? Can the cash flow support it? And what happens if the world turns colder than expected? That is the kind of question workers are rarely trained to ask. Owners have to ask it. The fourth section of the worker rulebook is what I call the hard work trap. This is the most emotionally charged part of all because it touches people as dignity. Nobody wants to hear that hard work is not enough, especially not the person who has given the best years of his life to proving he can endure it. The source says work hard and you'll succeed is the biggest lie of all. And while the phrasing is dramatic, the structure underneath it matters. Hard work matters. I believe in hard work. I have lived it. But hard work alone does not tell you where the economic surplus goes. The hardest working people in a society are often not the richest. Why? Because effort and ownership are not the same thing. A person can work 60 hours a week and still build very little personal wealth if those hours only increase the value of a machine someone else owns. Fe Felicite, Fe turn 86 file 0 Fe. That is the hard work trap. You get morally rewarded for sacrifice, but you are not structurally rewarded in proportion to the sacrifice. That is the trap. The worker rulebook tells you hard work is the path to success because systems need hard workers. That message is socially useful. Economically, it is incomplete. Hard work without ownership can build competence. Hard work without ownership can build discipline. Hard work without ownership can even build temporary income. But hard work without ownership does not usually build durable freedom. Ownership does. That is the sentence that has to hit you in the chest, not because labor is worthless, because labor by itself is too linear. You have one body, one calendar, one stress threshold, one bandwidth limit. Ownership is different. Ownership can scale. Ownership can continue. When you sleep, ownership can be sold. Ownership can be leveraged. Ownership can attract capital. Ownership can be protected structurally. Ownership can give you bargaining power in a way pure labor rarely does. That is why the rule book switch matters so much. It is not a personality change. It is a change in economic logic. The old rule book teaches you to become a better labor unit. The new rule book teaches you to convert labor into control. Now let me move to the second rule book, the owner rule book. This is where things get uncomfortable because most people hear words like negotiation, risk, leverage, promotion, and self-advocacy and feel a little dirty inside. That discomfort is not random. It was trained into them. The source says rich kids are taught that rules are flexible, that authority is negotiable, that risk can be managed, and that if something does not work, you pivot and try another path. That is a coarse way of saying something important. Some people grow up learning that systems can be worked with, shaped, and re-entered from different angles, while others are taught that systems are fixed walls to be obeyed. Faithful site Fay turn 86, file 0 Fay. The first part of the owner rule book is what I call the negotiation mind. Workers are often trained to wait for permission. Owners are trained to test terms. That difference changes everything. A worker asks, what is allowed? An owner asks, what is possible? A worker asks, what is the standard salary? An owner asks, what is the real value? And what can I trade for? A worker asks, can I do this? An owner asks, what would happen if I did? That is not criminal thinking. That is economic thinking. The source uses a phrase like, ask for forgiveness, not permission. And I want to clean that up into something more serious. Do not break laws recklessly. Do not act like a fool, but do learn to stop assuming that every norm, every institutional expectation, every career path, every credential track, and every timeline is morally binding on you. Many are just default settings. Default settings are wonderful if you want an average output. They are terrible if you want unusual control. Fay file site Fay turn 86 file 0 Fay. The second part of the owner rulebook is what I call the managed risk lens. The source is right that all of life contains risk. Jobs are risky, businesses are risky, investing is risky, everything is risky. So the useful question is never whether risk can be avoided. The useful question is whether the risk is being paid for, understood, bounded, and matched to upside. Workers are often taught to fear visible risk and ignore hidden risk. Starting a business looks risky. Depending on one employer for all your income somehow looks safe. That is nonsense. One is visible risk, the other is hidden risk. The owner rulebook tries to make the hidden risk visible and the visible risk intelligible. Fay file site Fay turn 86 file 0 Fay. That is the managed risk lens. You stop saying risk bad. You start asking what is the downside, what protects me, and what could the upside become if I am right. You stop moralizing. You start pricing. That is an owner habit. The third part of the owner rulebook is what I call the asset conversion habit. This is the one thing I wish more people understood. Early income is not wealth. Income is raw material until your income is repeatedly converted into assets. It is just temporary purchasing power. The source circles around this repeatedly through business ownership, rental properties, investments, and using debt to buy income, generating things rather than depreciating junk. The point is not that every person should become a landlord or a CEO by Tuesday. The point is that money must eventually become something productive if you want freedom. A larger paycheck with zero asset conversion often creates a richer lifestyle and the same old dependence. A modest paycheck with disciplined asset conversion can begin changing the structure of a life. Fay file site Fay turn 86 file 0 Fay. That is the asset conversion habit. How much of what you earn becomes something that can earn back? That question is more important than almost any motivational slogan, because that question tells you whether your labor is disappearing into consumption or being turned into future leverage. That is the whole bridge between worker and owner. Now we move to the third rulebook, the rulebook reader. This is where the game stops being only about ownership and becomes about retention and positioning. Because many people manage to build value and still lose too much of it through bad structure, bad contracts, bad tax posture, weak legal understanding, or pure ignorance. The source is strongest here when it talks about taxes, loopholes, shell structures, depreciation, deductions, and the way rich people pay for experts to read the code while ordinary people simply obey the visible surface of it. I am not endorsing illegality. I am not endorsing fraud. I am endorsing literacy. There is a gigantic difference between those things. The tax code exists, corporate structures exist, deductions exist, legal entity choices exist, depreciation rules exist, investment accounts are treated differently, business expenses are treated differently, asset classes are treated differently. If you never learn any of that, then you will spend much of your life leaking value simply because someone told you good people just pay their fair share and stop asking questions. Fe site, fe turn 86 file 0 fe. That is why I call this final layer the rulebook reader. The worker obeys the visible rule. The owner uses the system productively. The rulebook reader understands why the exact same economic activity can produce very different outcomes depending on how it is structured. That is enormous. And this is where so many middle class people get ambushed. They build income. Sometimes they even build an asset, but they do not understand entity structure. They do not understand deductible versus non-deductible expense. They do not understand timing. They do not understand what gets taxed as labor and what gets treated as capital. They do not understand where the legal protections are weak. They do not understand which contracts give away too much control. They do not understand the difference between gross success and retained success. That ignorance is expensive, not because the system is evil in some cartoon way, because the system is written and someone always has to read it. If you do not read it, you still live under it. So you might as well learn. Now let me say the thing that matters most. This is not a story about becoming unethical. The source spends time talking about pharmaceutical pricing, manipulative tech products, real estate concentration, and other ugly examples of people making money while ignoring the human costs. That is real, but it is not the path I am recommending. You do not need to become morally hollow to switch rule books. You do not need to break laws. You do not need to exploit everyone in sight. What you do need is the maturity to stop confusing politeness with strategy, conformity with safety, and obedience with virtue. Fe file site, fe turn 86 file 0 fe. There is a lawful, disciplined, strategically serious way to switch rule books. Question default paths. Treat college as a tool, not a religion. Treat jobs as fuel, not identity. Treat saving as staging capital, not the destination. Treat debt as something to classify rather than fear blindly. Treat risk as something to manage rather than worship or avoid mindlessly. Treat tax, contracts, and structure as part of the game, not as boring footnotes for later. That is already enough to separate you from most people, because most people do not need more courage. They need a new interpretation. They need to stop asking, what should a good person do, as their only economic question, and start asking, what creates control, what preserves it, and what slowly turns my labor into something that can outlive my labor. That is the whole difference. Now let me talk about the bridge, because this is where almost everyone loses nerve. The bridge is not glamorous. The bridge is where you still have a job, still have bills, still have social expectations, still have people around you who understand salaries but not ownership, and you have to begin converting anyway. That is why so few do it. It feels slower at first. You may look less successful while you are actually becoming more dangerous. You may drive the less impressive car, rent the less impressive apartment, turn down the flashy expense, use the raise for acquisition instead of applause, study tax or contracts when other people are consuming entertainment, build a side asset. Nobody claps for refuse certain norms and get judged for it. That is the bridge. The source says people have to be willing to be uncomfortable, face criticism, and go against the grain. That is right. The social cost is real. The system protects itself not only through law but through approval. People around you will often reward the old rulebook and distrust the new one because the old rulebook makes them feel normal. The new one makes them feel examined. Fe file site, fe turn 86 file 0 fe. That is why you must decide early which approval matters more. The approval of the crowd or the approval of your future self, because usually you do not get both at the same time. And if you keep choosing applause, you will almost always choose the worker rulebook a little longer than you should. Now I want to condense all of this into the actual switch. Step one is leave obedience as your default setting, not morality, not law. Obedience. Stop treating every social norm as if it exists for your benefit. Ask who the norm serves, ask what it costs you, ask whether it protects you or merely domesticates you. The source says rich people see rules as flexible while poor people see them as walls. There is a usable truth there. Many rules are just conventions carrying moral pressure. A great many can be questioned, renegotiated, or bypassed without any criminality at all. That is the first awakening. Fe file site, fe turn 86 file 0 fe. Step 2 is convert income into ownership relentlessly. Small at first is fine, embarrassing at first is fine, slow at first is fine. But your labor must begin building something that can keep working after the Labor Day ends. A product, a business, an audience, equity, a cash flowing asset, an IP layer, productive claim. If none of that is happening, then the rulebook switch is still theoretical. Step 3 is learn the structure well enough to keep what you build. Tax entities, contracts, legal protections, risk boundaries, incentives. This is where the rich separate from the comfortable. They understand that. Making money and keeping money are different games. The rulebook reader learns both. Now let me say the part nobody wants to hear. Most people will not make this switch. Not because they cannot, because they do not want the identity pain. They want a rich life with a worker narrative. They want freedom without becoming different. They want unusual results through ordinary compliance. That is not how it works. The worker rulebook can give you predictability. The owner rulebook can begin giving you control. The rulebook reader can keep that control from leaking away. Those are different stages, and each one demands a different level of honesty. So here is the mirror. Are you still following rules mainly because they were handed to you? Are you still calling a paycheck wealth? Are you still treating all debt as evil while your expenses quietly finance everyone else as assets? Are you still hoping hard work will solve an ownership problem? Are you still ignoring the structure because structure feels dry and effort feels noble? Are you ready to switch rulebooks? That is the whole divide. Not good people and bad people, not rebels and conformists, not polite and impolite, worker logic and wealth logic. And if I were writing a contract with my future self tonight, it would say this: I will stop following rules blindly just because they were packaged as morality. I will keep the rules that protect me and question the ones that position me for average. I will treat income as fuel, not as wealth. I will convert labor into ownership before labor becomes my permanent identity. I will learn to classify debt, not fear it mindlessly. I will study the structure because what I do not understand will still govern me. I will accept the social cost of being strategically different, and I will remember that becoming rich is not mainly about breaking laws. It is about breaking the wrong rule book before it quietly breaks you. That is the whole truth. Not chaos, not rebellion theater, not greed, a switch worker rules, owner rules, rule book literacy, 3 layers, 1 life, and 1 decision about whether you want to remain obedient to the old game or finally build your own position inside a better one. Make that decision carefully.